reading the oldest account we have of the first Easter, Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15. First and foremost, I hand on to you the tradition I have received, that Christ died for our sins, that he was buried, that he was raised to life on the third day, that he appeared to Peter and afterward to the 12. Then he appeared to over 500 of our brothers and sisters at once, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Then he appeared to James and afterward to all of the apostles. Last of all, he appeared to me as well as one born out of time. But this is what we all proclaim, and this is what you have believed. Now, if this is what we proclaim, that Christ was raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection, then Christ was not raised, and if Christ was not raised, then our gospel, our good news, is null and void, and so too is your faith. And we turn out to have given false evidence about God because we bore witness that he raised Christ to life. If the dead are not raised, it follows that Christ was not raised, and if Christ was not raised, your faith has nothing to it, and you are still in your old state of sin. And it follows also that those who have died within Christ's fellowship are utterly lost. My friends, if it is for this life only that Christ has given us hope, we are of all people most miserable. But the truth is, Christ was raised, the first fruits of the harvest of the dead. One man writes that their 3-year-old Nicole was as anxious for Easter to come as she had been for Christmas. Since my wife was expecting our third child in just a few weeks, many people were giving us baby gifts, and Nicole was getting some also on the side, as it were. And for Easter, she picked out a new dress, and her grandmother had given her a new white bonnet. As we shopped at a store to buy her a new pair of shoes to go with her outfit, she once again said, "I can't wait for Easter, Daddy." I asked her, "Do you know what Easter means, honey?" "Yes." "Well, what does Easter mean?" In her own sweet 3-year-old way, she raised her arms up with a smile on her face, and at the top of her voice she yelled, "Surprise!" And as a good word for it, we ought to be surprised, because it's the most subversive story going. It's a story that says CNN doesn't have the whole truth about life. But we've been here before, and we know what the menu is today. One woman entered a church where they used the traditional greeting, "Christ is risen." The greeters at the door said, "Christ is risen." The usher took her down the aisle, seated her, and said, "Christ is risen." And she said rather distractedly, "I know, they told me at the door." So let me say it right up front. I believe deeply and profoundly that there's a lot more in store for us than just this life. And I believe, moreover, that whether you believe that determines not whether you live forever, but in large measure whether you truly live now. I just read you one of the oldest pieces of Christian literature, far older than the Gospels. We can date it. Paul wrote the letter about 54 AD, which would have been about 20 years after the death of Jesus. Now, 20 years is not a long time. When I was a kid, I thought it was. I thought it was forever. Now I know it's just the twinkling of an eye. But Paul is quoting, he says so, earlier material, an account he insists he got from the early Christian community in Jerusalem where it all happened. And there's really only one occasion where he could have gotten the story, a visit 2 or 3 years after the event. So within 3 years after the event, there's a courageous band of believers prepared to swear to the death, literally, that they met this Jesus of Nazareth beyond the grave 5 different occasions. 2 of them individual encounters, 2 of them by a dozen or so, and once in the company of 500. Now all I'm saying is that this sounds like a pretty reliable account, a report that has the ring of truth about it, even if it is an account of something that ought to make your hair stand on end, an account of something quite beyond your wildest dreams and imaginings. Paul says, that's what they told me, and you know what that means. If it happened to him, it'll happen to you and me. Thanks be to God. Now, to my mind, that has a curious plausibility about it, because it confirms the hunches and intuitions of every people that has ever lived. It affirms the concern for justice and love and meaning, which is the part of any real human heart. It begins to make some sense out of this whole show we call life, the passing parade, the cruelty, the injustice, the brutality of Dachau and the Gulag and Kosovo. They're still there to be agonized about and wept over, even as his cross was there, the epitome of all that is wretched and evil about life in this world. It's still there. The resurrection story doesn't eliminate one twit of it, but it does give us a whole new perspective from which to view it all, because it says that the Milosevic's of this world do not have the last word, nor do the diseases or the disasters or any of the other destruction that human life is heir to. God and life have the last word. Is it so implausible that the God of this incredible universe should give us a glimpse, however fleeting, into the reality of that other world? It seems to me that implausibility rests rather with the other point of view, with the insistence that this life and world is all there is. If so, that means, as Paul points out, that he's a liar. Those early Christians were willing to collude and die for a hoax. That Christianity, indeed Western civilization, was born of a massive delusion. That life and love and justice have no ultimate meaning. That the brutes and thugs of this world make out infinitely better than many of the innocent and deserving. That there are no ultimate consequences for anything we human beings decide to do. It means that any talk of a God of love is basically nonsense. I find that much more incredible to swallow, that whole package. Now, I know there are problems. The so-called scientific worldview we've grown up with doesn't seem to leave much place for heaven. Where is Jesus? Where is my dad? Up, down. I think this explains the popularity among the New Age types of the idea of reincarnation, because you can imagine being recycled here on this planet. Of course, they ignore the fact that in the great religions of the East, reincarnation is viewed as a punishment to be avoided at all costs. There's a story about the woman who went to the spiritualist to see if she could contact her dead husband. The spiritualist went into a trance, and soon a voice was heard. "Mary," it said, "are you there?" The woman was ecstatic. "Henry, is it really you? Are you all right?" I'm fine, I'm fine." "Is it nice there, dear?" "Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Blue sky, pure air, green grass. And the chickens, Mary, you've never seen such beautiful chickens." "Henry, chickens in heaven?" "Who's talking about heaven? I'm a rooster in Iowa." Where do you put heaven in this universe? I don't know. I really have no idea, but there are astrophysicists now who talk about an infinite number of universes, or about a flip side to this universe. So it certainly sounds like there's space available. For modern science, you see, for modern science, the world is no longer the closed system that you and I learned about in school. Of course, we're caught inevitably in a world of space and time, and cannot therefore possibly imagine life outside of it, beyond it. We can only trust on the basis of the resurrection stories that it is real. It's as real as Jesus was to those early witnesses. Different he was, transformed, but real. So the only answer I have to the question, "Where is my dad today?" is this: he's with God. And if you stop and think about it, God is very near. But if God truly is, and if he really loves us, then why doesn't he, as one of our comics has said, make a deposit for me of $1 million in a Swiss bank account so I can be sure? Why does he tantalize us with this story and then leave us hanging before the choice of this day? Believe or refuse to believe? Have faith or despair? Well, let me answer the question with another question. Is it possible that it is important that we struggle with the challenge of this day, where we must confront faith and life as choices to be made, commitments to be lived up to, loyalties to be lived out? You see, the problem that some of us have with this day is not so much in our heads as in our hearts. On occasion, somebody will say to me, well, you believe in it because you need to believe in it. But you know, that kind of psychological nonsense cuts both ways. You doubt and despair because you need to doubt and despair. The possibility of what belief might mean is too powerful for you. We hesitate before wholehearted belief, I suggest, not so much because we have intellectual problems with it, but because it scares us no little bit. Because if we really trusted it, if we really got our hearts around it, if we really surrendered to it, it would open up dimensions of hope and joy and meaning in this life that are in many ways unnerving. In some ways, it's quite frankly easier to remain neutral and unknowing. It is in a way more comfortable. It is at least protection against being disappointed. Stop and think what demands it makes on you emotionally this day in your relationships. If you walk out of here this morning truly believing that they are for eternity. If this story is true, we will never come to the end of enjoying each other's company. Never come to the end of fresh occasions for joy. What a whole new perspective and sense of purpose that imposes upon us. What a demand to take one another truly seriously, to seek to love. In any event, I've discovered it's not only plausible to believe, it is possible to believe. And I've discovered that sooner or later you've got to decide who you're going to believe in this world, or you're lost. Lost to faith and hope and any life worth living. And I've discovered that to the degree we truly begin to believe this story, we truly begin to live in a whole new way. Which is to say, I believe not only because it's plausible and possible, but because it is powerful when believed. Belief produces a certainty over time that raises life to whole new levels of vitality and hope and joy right here and now. Faith in the resurrection produces a life before death that has the ring of eternity about it. Paul's concern for his friends is very interesting. He calls his friends back to faith in the resurrection, not because it'll get them into heaven, but because it will deliver them from misery here on earth. And that is always the ultimate test of faith and truth. What does it make of us? How does it transform us? Does it make us any better off or worse off as human beings? It's interesting that even the social sciences now confirm the transforming impact upon us of our faith in eternity. Andrew Greeley says that the principal atheistic architects of the modern mind, namely Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche, were wrong when they argued that hope in heaven inhibits us from enjoying or caring about life on earth. The data are all to the contrary. Those who believe in life after death lead happier lives and are more trusting people than those who do not. And I do not find that those who've seriously chosen the way of faith in the risen Jesus are ever disappointed. On their contrary, they find their faith to be the one thing that keeps them going, that makes real life before death possible. Iona McLaughlin has written a little book called Triumph Over Tragedy, and certainly she knew it, as few of us ever will. Tells of her struggle to find purpose and meaning in life following the death of her daughter to a brain tumor, and a few days later the death of her husband Pete and son Jack in an automobile accident which left her near death. The sequence of tragedy, as you can imagine, was overwhelming. She says lying in her hospital bed, she wondered for what purpose she should go on living. She often wished and prayed for death. But there were people in her life who would not let her give up. Though she was 1,500 miles from home, they flew to her side. So she hung in there, as much for them as anything, and the day came when she was able to leave the hospital. But what to do? For 20 years she'd been a wife and mother. Now her husband, her daughter, her son were gone. How do you so radically change from being wife and mother to being neither? She went back to school. But there, among the cynicism of college students and professors, her faith in God began to falter. Maybe they were right. The universe was without reason or plan. Her despair led to thoughts of suicide. Then she wouldn't have to struggle any longer. The anniversary of the deaths of first Jane, then Pete, then Jack were difficult milestones. She says it was the sudden unexpected memories which would shatter her the most, a note left in a forgotten book, a person walking down the street with the same gait as her Peter. The struggle with why was the most difficult struggle in her life. Why did God take from her these people she loved most? Was God a capricious God who struck out by creating pain? She says it was a letter that came from her minister that helped her begin to change her perspective and see things from a different side. God is as sad over this as you are. It is not God's will that such things happen, but God's will is for life to be lived to its fullest. We Christians believe in immortality. Whatever is commenced here will be completed there. Nothing is lost out of God's care. So for Iona, the final step in overcoming her tragedy was in moving beyond the why to accepting that she was where she was, and with God's help and love, she could love and move on to where she should be. She writes, whatever is, you can't change it. Whatever has happened, you cannot go back. The thing to do wherever I am is to do the best I can and leave the rest in the hands of God. You put your hands in His hands because you know He's there. And life did go on for her. The despair and hopelessness of the difficult years never returned with the same power. She taught at college. The years were fulfilling. The great learnings came through the grace of God and hope in Him. She did live again through the strength of what she came to call her Easter faith. So see, the story grants us a new perspective and a new power and a new strength, and then I think also a new peace and equanimity in the face of our own mortality. It's the heart afraid of breaking that never learns to dance. It's the dream afraid of waking that never takes a chance. It's the one who won't be taken, who cannot seem to give, and the soul afraid of dying that never learns to live. One of you gave me a story a few weeks ago, a story that I think conveys something of the spirit that this day calls for in the face of our own mortality, a story out of an earlier era, more rural, the time of wakes and open caskets. I remember it well from my early parishes. In any event, there was a woman who'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness and had only months to live. As she was getting her things in order, she contacted her minister and had him come to the house to discuss certain of her final wishes, what she wanted sung at her funeral, what scriptures he was to read. Everything was quite in order, and the minister was preparing to leave when the woman suddenly remembered something very important to her. "There's one more thing," she said excitedly. "What's that?" came the minister's reply. "This is very important," she said. "I want to be buried with a fork in my right hand." He stood looking at her, stunned, not knowing quite what to say. "That surprises you, doesn't it?" the woman asked with a smile. "Well, to be honest, I am puzzled," said her minister. The woman explained, "In all my years of attending church socials and potluck dinners and even Thanksgiving dinners, I always remember that when the dishes of the main course were being cleared, someone would inevitably lean over and say, 'Keep your fork.'" You've been there. It was my favorite moment because I knew that something better was coming, like velvety chocolate cake or deep dish apple pie, something wonderful and with substance. So when my friends and family see me there in my casket with a fork in my right hand, I want them to ask, "What's with the fork?" And then I want you to tell them, "Keep your fork, the best is yet to come." Now, what if, in a broad sense, that is the ultimate truth about life? The best is always yet to come. So maybe the next time you reach down for your fork, it will remind you oh so gently that it is true. The best is still to come. May God bless you on this Easter day, keep you safe, and above all grant you life here and hereafter. Amen.